Hey, welcome to the channel. I'm Pompa, and today we're talking about non-destructive editing techniques. One reason I love non-destructive editing techniques is that they allow me to make simple tweaks and edits along the way, whether it's feedback from a boss, a client, or even myself as I'm trying to get a design to its final state. The best part about these is that I can come back to a project an hour later, a day later, a week later, a month later, even a year later, and make those adjustments as needed, or even use those same effects that I've done on a particular project, duplicate them into a new project, and swap out some of the main components like a particular featured image or something, but then keep the same look and design that I already have. This has been really helpful for me when I've done email campaigns, and it's something that's allowed me to be super effective, especially when I'm making those edits from feedback. So I'm going to jump back into this project and show you how I used non-destructive editing techniques to make this fireman poster. So you can see here in the project, I have my main final image. It kind of has the final image with the final looks applied. I'm gonna go ahead and turn all those off and jump in. So I'm gonna focus on this particular character here within the poster and kind of talk about how I'm using the various techniques on him. And then you can see that then also this is applied to the rest of the project within my layers panel here. So if I focus on him, the first thing I do is like to use smart objects, especially for my main features, or if I'm bringing in stock assets from like Envato or Adobe Photo, wherever I'm getting those stock assets from. I like to make my edits to those layers, to those images, and then usually save that as a smart object because it gives me a little bit of organization by keeping all those layers edited onto a particular smart object. But what's also really nice about smart objects is if I zoom out and if I size them up, retain that, I can come in here and see that I'm preserving a lot of that detail from my original image. I size them up, and this is a pretty big canvas, so I can see that I'm getting the same detail in his face, in his helmet. If I scroll down here on the bunker gear, I'm getting the same detail on the bunker gear. So I'm just preserving a lot of detail. Another thing that I love about smart objects is that, say I were to come in here, turn my transform controls on, turn warp on, and apply some crazy warp to make him fit into my scene. And then say I'm gone through a few edits, I've been doing other things as I'm adding other characters in or whatever the case might be. Well, what's really nice about this, if for some reason I slept on it, the next day I'm coming back and finishing a project, and I'm like, oh man, I really don't like the way I did this. Because he's a smart object, he's actually, all the information is actually housed within that smart object. So the original asset is untouched, it's undamaged. I can come in here, simply duplicate these layers into the main group, create a new smart object, and start fresh. And as I said earlier, one thing that I really like about smart objects is that they can kind of help keep some of my file already a little bit more organized, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But in this particular case, I have this image. I'll go ahead and turn some of these layer masks off, go ahead and expand my original crop. As you can see here, I have my original character, and I have a nice clean outline of him. I got a little bit of blurring here, but I know I'm not going to really use the legs. There's a little bit here, but I can use some generative fill to get that cleaned up. But his face is a little off because I just snapped the image at the wrong time, but I love that I got a nice clean look. The one I do like, where he has like a nice look to his face, he's got like this stoic look. Got this little bit of foreground fireman arm here that's just bleeding into his arm a little too much, that especially with this fuzziness like right on the edge, makes it a little bit harder. So what I can do is use my layer mask, blend those two images together, and I have a clean fireman that I can use, and it houses these together, because normally what I would have to do is either I could group these together or come in here and hit link layers, or just use the link tool down here. But instead of having to do that, I can just save these as a smart object, preserve their detail, keep my project files organized, and have these to come back to if I wanted to do any little bit of adjustments or tweaks later without having to add more layers to my project here. So one of the things I really do love about smart objects. The next thing I do is I use a lot of adjustment layers. So adjustment layers are really great. I usually pull them in from this adjustment panel because they'll come in as individual layers. And one of the big benefits I find is that not only can I apply to get the look I want, so in this particular case to this, our little character here, you can see I have a couple of different adjustment layers on him. I have the exposure layer, a couple of them here, using these essentially as dodge and burn tools, and I can apply a brush, paint in the layer mask, and dial in the look I want. That's kind of the biggest reason I love using adjustment layers in this method, because I can come back in here and tweak this. Even a year later, I can adjust the exposure amount I'm putting on this exposure element here. But as I was saying, that I can actually use their layer mask to really dial in a look. So in this case, I'm trying to enhance his the light coming from the left side and darkening the shadows on his right side to make it feel a little bit more cinematic in this sense. I can also then have these other adjustment layers where I'm better blending them into this scene using my hue and hue and saturation and my levels layers here. One of the big benefits of using adjustment layers in this way is that you really have a lot more control. Not only can you remove it easily, adjust it in the properties value, but you can also use the layer mask to make this even better. And that takes me to my third point, layer masks. The thing a lot of people use layer masks for is to create these separations between the subject and their background, or if you're just trying to paint something out that doesn't belong, or even how you blend it in. So this is a very classic way to use layer masks. You can see there. But as I was already talking about earlier, one of the things I tend to like to use them more is to dial in the look of an image using adjustment layers. So I kind of talked about using my exposures as a dodge and burn tool, but beyond that, I can come in here and use these solid color fills and then use a smoke brush or a very soft brush and create this smoky haze look on top of my character. So that way, as I add in my other elements into this design, he better blends in with the scene and how I have these various fires and flame and smoke assets. So he has a little bit of haze and also creates good separation between him and other characters within the scene of this particular poster. But you can also use those layer masks across groups. You can see here I have a group up here where I have my little fire department text. And I was able to use my layer mask on this because in the foreground, I have these firemen that sit in front of it, but I wanted to make sure that they were properly clipping because there was a little bit of opacity to these firemen. So I wanted them to properly block the fire department text right here. So layer masks are very versatile. They offer a lot of advantages, especially when dialing in a look or blending various elements into a scene. So highly recommend layer masks. The next thing that I do that is very useful to my workflow is if I jump back into my smart object, I like creating these blank layers. You just come down here on your layers panel, this little plus in the square, and I'll get a nice new blank layer. Now what I can do with this is I can grab a healing brush or a clone tool. So say for some reason I wanted to remove this element of his bunker gear. I could grab my healing brush, come in, paint this out, do a little bit of refinement, slowly get it there. And for this, we'll kind of call that good. And now I have this nice blank layer that is able to have that on there. Now, instead of doing this directly onto the image, because that might make sense in terms of like, oh, I want to make sure the image is cleaned up and just have a good clean image from the get. I still like doing it on a separate layer because again, I like having that freedom and flexibility. If for some reason further along, I realized like, you know what, I actually really wanted this back in. If I had painted it out directly onto the layer, I have to go back and start from scratch, pull in my original layer, cut it out, do everything to get back to where I was because I accidentally painted this out and I realized I should have kept it in. Whereas now I can just come over here, turn this layer off and my elements back in. So it's something that's very useful. Again, anything that I can do when it comes to non-destructive editing techniques that can preserve images, that can give me flexibility in my design, I want to do that. And I find having blank layers and using my clone or healing brush tools allow me to do that in spades. Finally, let's talk about organization. So, as I said kind of at the beginning, what's nice about this project is when I first opened it, I had all my original looks and design, the final export that I had here. I was able to turn these off and then jump into my main project. And because I had labeled everything properly, it was really easy for me to come in here and kind of turn things on and off when I set this up for this video. So as you can see, I have my foreground images here. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn everything off and I can just see my foreground elements. I have my FD flames. So these are the flames that appear right above the main FD text. I have my fire department text. I have the various firefighter elements from earlier. So I have my center group there. I have the center background, which has the elements that sits behind the main characters. And then I have my background elements here. And then obviously if I turn everything on, they're all there. And then if I want to come in and edit something like some of these firemen in the foreground, I could just jump into my foreground folder, jump into my trio in this particular case, and edit these characters as needed. Could also give this project to another designer and let them make the various edits I need and be really easy to give them specific feedback on how to not just where I want something adjusted or cleaned up, but they would know where in the project to go to make that happen. Finally, within this, I also like using clipping mask in this way. So I have these adjustment layers I clip just to this particular character of this firefighter. But if I come over here, I can see that this firefighter has his own set of adjustment layers that are clipped just to him. And then I even have some solid color fills applied to just them. because I have how I use the different layer mask on each of these to get the different looks I want. And if I actually unclip some of these and turn off their layer mask, now I can see that this gets applied to the whole project, which would be pretty terrible. So thankfully, clipping exists, and I can clip that so it only affects that particular firefighter in this case. And then I can use this layer mask to get that adjustment where I'm just getting that nice little glow on the side of his character profile over here on the edge. So at a high level, that's how I use these non-destructive editing techniques to achieve flexible designs that can take feedback from a boss, a client, or even my future self. So hopefully you found these useful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.